and should all be acknowledged and recognized as what they are. Sometimes it feels like an identity crisis. What the fuck have they really done? Moor, Blackamoor, Ethiopian, Black, African, Negro, niggers. All of these will always be Eurocentric social instruments, no matter how they are deployed, no matter how they are used.
Okay. Let me clear my throat, right? DNA tests do not prove ancestry. They estimate similarity. So the problem is when someone says Black Americans are 74% African with European admixture, they're 9 times out of 10 referring to consumer DNA tests like Ancestry.com or 23andMe, which use reference populations to estimate percentages. But this is not the same as proving ancestry. The reality is, these tests do not trace lineage with exact precision. They measure how many genetic markers you share with people in their reference database that are based on anthropological statistical models, who are themselves modern populations often no older than a few hundred years. Your African percentage is based on a statistical likelihood that certain DNA segments resemble those in populations labeled as the West African, such as Igbo or Yoruba, which themselves are modern constructions that are not timeless genetic entities. Reference populations change all the time. When a database updates, your percentages changes as well. That's a sign that the method is fluid, not fixed. And the problem with this is that it conflates anthropology with genetic certainty, which is another problem in and of itself, because statements like, he probably has Igbo ancestry, he probably has Yoruba ancestry, rely on anthropological labels that are built on linguistic, geographic, or colonial classification systems that are not even genetic or scientifically based at all. The reality is, again, Igbo, Yoruba are ethnic and cultural groups, not fixed genetic categories. These identities emerged over time and were often redefined by colonial administrations, missionaries, and anthropologists, which means you can't extract something called Igbo DNA from someone. At best, you're matching to clusters of people currently identified as Igbo, many of whom have mixed ancestries themselves. DNA doesn't know culture. It can't detect your language, your religion, or how your ancestors lived. That's all contextual interpretation, not data. Genetic overlap means percentages are arbitrary, which is kind of ironic because a lot of people tend to treat these percentages like they're hard truths, implying precision, such as 74% African, when in reality, human populations share the vast majority of their DNA and the differences are minimal. All humans share 99.9% of their DNA. What these tests are measuring is a tiny fraction of variation, and even that is overlapping most of the time. West Africans, East Africans, European, and even South Asians share many of the same markers. The distinction between African and European DNA is statistical, not biological, not anthropological realities. It's about which patterns are more common in which group, not what belongs to a group. So when you get a result like 74% African, that really means 74% of your DNA most closely resembles the patterns we see in populations we have labeled African. And if you are a thinking person, you can get what that implies. So a Black American is told, you have a DNA marker that resembles modern West African populations, when in reality, they may also carry significant Indian DNA that is either underrepresented, misclassified, or ignored in the report. Because guess what? Resemblance does not equal origin. The test doesn't say you come from West Africa. It says your DNA segment looks like people living in West Africa today. But those modern populations have themselves been shifted, mixed, and may share markers with others, including people from the Americas, because of the overlapping markers. When companies say 74% African, they are compressing complex and layered ancestry into a simplified, rounded number. If you have Indian ancestry that overlaps genetically with parts of West Africa due to ancient shared markers or incomplete reference data, it can be absorbed into the African percentage, which leads to my next problem. Genetic companies and population researchers regularly reclassify regions, tribes, and categories. What used to be West African now might be broken down into Nigerian, Ghanaian, Mindi. These reclassifications are not based on new DNA, but on reinterpretations of the same markers with different labels. Especially as more people submit DNA, the reference population shifts, and so do your percentages. Your identity changes not because your DNA changed, but because the label system has updated. This undermines any claim to fixed ancestry. It shows that it's based on models, not objective facts. The argument that someone is Black American with 74% African ancestry and likely has any type of roots in any various tribe from that region, it sounds scientific, but it's based on estimates of anthropological data, modern colonial era categories, not timeless identities. It's database matching, not genetic uniqueness, and probability models that does not reflect direct lineages. It confuses similarity with origin and cultural identity with genetic clustering. God damn. DNA tests don't know your ancestry in any definitive way. They approximate it using ever-changing models shaped by anthropological, colonial legacies, and marketing, not by objective, immutable science. I like to say, it's like mixing drinks, or like colors, If we mix 1/4 milk and 2/4 coffee and 1/4 creamer, will we still call that drink creamer? If we mix 1/3 red, 1/3 gold, and 1/3 of black, do we call it Black American or Red American? Now imagine the first drink, Imagine, water or milk. Two different substances joined in equal measure to form something new. This blend, once combined again with pure milk, becomes overwhelmingly milk in taste and nature, though the water remains quietly within that same drink. To call that first drink water would be a distortion, ignoring the transformation that is taking place. Yet, in the realm of identity, especially racial or ancestry identity, we often fixate on the faintest trace of origin, as if a single drop defines the whole. But identity, like mixture, is not anchored in beginnings. It is shaped by what's becoming. It's like a shot of espresso. It's bold, it's concentrated. Pure coffee in essence and form. You add milk, you get a latte. Softer, smoother, no longer just coffee, but something redefined by its blending. You blend that with latte, you get ice, cream, flavor. Mix it all together and you get a frappe, something entirely new, labored and complex. To call it frappe or coffee alone erases the transformation, reducing a rich evolution to an origin that is long detached from. We gotta break down these models and recontextualize our history because it's being stolen from right under our nose, under a label that has been proven to be false. All because of phenotypical similarities. We have been conflated globally when we are the fucking water on the planet. If you got eyes, you'll see. If you got the motherfucking ears, you'll hear. It's like a game, right? So if they find like a population of what I like to call out of place Negroes, they try to shift the labels. So like say for instance, they find some black person that lived in Europe probably like 800 to 1,000 years ago, right? What they'll do is instead of saying like, oh, this is a European, they say, oh no, this is a African. And this African in our post-transatlantic slave context has to be some form of servant or, whatever the fuck, right? So, oh, this black person that we found was African. And, all Africans somehow magically were slaves in that time period, even though this is before, the transatlantic slave trade. But say for instance, they find like a white person in fucking somewhere in Africa, like North Africa or fucking Egypt, then this person somehow becomes the magical identity that they constructed. So if you find a Eurasian, European, or a white person in Egypt, they are Egyptian. But if you find like a black African, more leaning towards person, then they inevitably come black African or Nubian or some other shit that they didn't construct it. They move the goalposts. Sometimes these identities are conflated and sometimes they're delineated, but it's because they're playing a game. It shifts context depending on what they need that game to be defined as for that moment. So a black person and this one little label that somehow conflates us all can be whatever they need a black person to be when they need that black person to be black. And when they need that black person to be non-black, they can shift the meaning. So, it's very interesting that the things play out like this. Like, we really gotta watch these motherfuckers, So really, just imagine like you stumble across an old car. It's tucked away in a dusty corner of a forgotten lot. The paint faded, the tires sag into the earth, and the windshield wears a film of age no wiper could ever wipe. The lot owner telling you though, oh, this car has been sitting here for about 20 years. You looking at the design, it's a model from like the 1980s, maybe a Chevy Impala or some shit. You all know, your mind wondering, maybe this car was someone's pride and joy or some shit like that. Maybe it had one owner, maybe three, you don't know. Maybe it was rebuilt, repainted, stripped, and reborn. And maybe at some point somebody just left the motherfucker behind. But here's the thing. Just because the car was parked here doesn't mean it's always been here. If a car was manufactured in Mexico and somebody bought it in California and then they live in fucking Wisconsin and they pass away in 1,000 years from now, someone finds the car parked right where they left it, what will they say? Will they say the car is from Wisconsin because it was found there? Will they call it California because that's where it was first registered? Or will they trace it back to Mexico because that's where it was built? And that's my problem with DNA tests. Assuming answer kids don't read the fucking journey, they only read where you're at now, your location. Not your story, just your similarities. They're not reading your lineage. They ain't checking that goddamn, what they call that shit, your registration. They're just reading where the fucking car been parked. But like, this car was manufactured in Mexico, sold to its first owner in California, changed hands about 3 times, and was finally driven to Wisconsin where we find it now. That's what a genealogy would read. But instead, the DNS say some shit like, well, it's 2025. A lot of Chevy Impalas were made in Wisconsin and they were seen there. We believe a Nissan plant that was in the area might have been responsible for making your car. Oh my God, you're fucking Wisconsin. But that's it. It's no journey, no migration, no nuance. It's just a proximity and a probability. They're not tracking where the vehicle has traveled. They're comparing your model to other cars parked nearby and saying, well, that shit looks like a match. Again, resemblance is not fucking origin. Presence is not proof. These tests that say you're 74% African, as if that explains the design, the mileage, the wear and the tear, but African is a parking zone. It's not a blueprint. It's a tag on the windshield, not the story written in the odometer. Your ancestors might have passed through places where no longer they even have names. Like for mine, for instance, the fucking town that they lived in, Bergamo, Alabama, that shit don't even exist no more. So it's like their DNA mixed, that shit split and reformed like cities falling off the map. To reduce that to a color-coded pie chart is like calling a classic Impala a Wisconsin car, just because that's where it stopped moving. And the thing about it is, the fucking journey matters, the wear and tear matters, the miles driven, the roads taken, and the hands that turned that motherfucking wheel. You dig? That's ancestry. DNA test, they just took a look at the motherfucking lot Point at a row of similar cars and they guess. 74% of these cars been made in Wisconsin.